Hello, welcome to Thematic Block 2, Learning Theme 2. In this video, we look at evaluating digital teaching and learning, and we look at an overall process for this. The level of proficiency for this video is leadership. So the main learning outcomes for this video is to support you to evaluate the effectiveness of digitally enhanced teaching strategies, and we will look at a process by which you might use for evaluating digital teaching and learning in your own context. This will provide a comprehensive guide to support you to measure the impact of technology in education, and it will provide you in particular with a systematic evaluation and evidence gathering method. We looked in previous videos at the science of learning. We look at why you might evaluate and different approaches to selecting a focus to evaluate, and now we're going to look at the overall process you might use to systematically make that inquiry. So first of all, you might look at what does success look like in your chosen dimension. Then you look at how other people might evaluate that dimension. So for example, if you're looking at problem-solving skills, or if you're looking at academic performance, or if you're looking at student motivation, what does success look like? Is it students, and if you're looking at motivation, is it students to be able to attend your class? Is it students asking questions? Is it students completing work without being asked? And look at maybe how other people evaluate motivation. Is there questionnaires? Is there surveys? Have other people used particular methodologies such as interviews or focus groups? So doing a bit of research about how other people might evaluate that measure is really, really important. And then based on that, decide on what type of evidence you want to gather. And we look at some ways you might do that, particularly qualitative evidence and quantitative evidence. And then you gather the data and analyse it. So first of all, we need to define what success looks like. So to allow us to choose the most appropriate method of evaluation, we need to define what success might look like from different practices or for your planned outcomes. So you might know you want to evaluate the impact of technology on student engagement, but what does successful student engagement look like to you? So to measure it, you really need to define it. What is student engagement? Is it students who ask questions? Is it students who complete tasks? Is it students who talk to their peers? So there might be a number of different dimensions of student engagement. Social engagement is one, where students might actively participate in class. They speak to peers, they ask questions, they are kind to other students. Then there might be cognitive engagement, where students participate or complete tasks, where they maybe do additional work outside of school or undertake additional responsibilities. And then there might be emotional engagement, where students are enjoying learning. They feel belong or wanted or included within the learning environment. So before we measure it, we need to look at what success looks like. And it's important to look at multiple stakeholder perspectives. So for one child, student engagement or successful student engagement might be getting really good marks on a test that makes them enjoy learning more. But for another student, it just might be the fact that someone asked them a question, or they participated in an activity within the classroom with others. It might actually be anything to do with cognitive engagement. It just might be the act of maybe working with other children. So success means different things to different people, and it's important that we capture all of those. So as I said, students' engagement can have behavioural, interpersonal, affective and cognitive components. So behavioural is just, student engagement is the student is present, they're not distracted during the learning activities, that they're maybe sitting in a group and listening, but that doesn't mean that they're actually fully engaged. Interpersonal means that they might be engaged on an interpersonal level, where they talk to their peers or have interactions with teachers. Affective then is enjoyment, or whether they really, really like what they're doing. And cognitive engagement is where they, actually participate in the learning material, that they're not just present and attentive, that they're using the learning material or participating or trying to complete the tasks to meet the learning outcomes. So different stakeholders view success through different lenses. And understanding these perspectives helped us to create a comprehensive evaluation. So you might look at the use of technology from your perspective, what's successful for you, but what's successful for the student. As I say, for your student's perspective, it might be mainly interpersonal and effective. So they enjoy the learning, they engage with their peers, the learning is meaningful, and they're interested in the subject area. But if you were to explain to a teacher, fellow teacher, what success might look like, it might be that they're not distracted, that they're attentive to the learning environment, that they're interacting with the learning material and you, and there's maybe increased motivation in terms of completing the task, and there's more effort. But not always effort is equal to engagement. So we need to look at whether we're looking at it from the student perspective or the teacher's perspective, or both. Now, once we've decided the different dimensions we want to measure, so in the previous video we looked at a focus. Now we're looking at, what that focus means and what kind of elements are we going to look at in terms of that area of focus. Now we look at how we're going to evaluate these measures. So once we've identified the dimension, we need to look at maybe approaches or methods or guidelines that can be used to evaluate it. So how do others evaluate maybe motivation? How do others evaluate the attitude to learning? How do others evaluate academic performance? Are there established methods to evaluate your chosen dimension? So there might be theory, in particular theoretical foundations that you're basing your action plan on, or there might be other methods, like other teachers might have used different approaches or strategies that might be used. So things like established evaluation instruments are often quantitative instruments, but maybe they might be used in a qualitative way if you want to gain more insight into the student experience. So, for example, there's an online student engagement scale, and although this is for online students, maybe you might be able to adapt some elements of this. So, they look at the skills students acquire, they look at emotional participation and engagement, they look at behavioural participation and performance using a self-rating scale. So that might be something that you might use when you're looking at student engagement. Or you might decide to maybe take elements of it or adapt it. There's also a QRT model that's used to look at, critical reflection and how students engage within the learning environment and encourages them to reflect on this. In particular, it looks at student ability to develop reflectional skills and maybe become self-regulated. It's important to note that many of these instruments don't use child-appropriate language. So if you see a methodology that's not appropriate for your children, you might decide to adapt it to make it more age-appropriate. But these are just some examples. There's lots of different examples. There's scales and instruments to measure self-efficacy. There's scales and instruments to measure motivation. And there are things that you might look at if you're interested in exploring these a bit further. It's important to note that these are widely available on the internet, and you can also use artificial intelligence maybe to help you identify strategies and sources that might be used to evaluate different dimensions or different elements. It's important to make sure that these are evidence-based and that they've been tested and they come from reputable journal articles, not on opinion-based approaches. So once you've evaluated or decided what different approaches there are and identified different strategies, then it's important for you to decide what type of evidence you want to gather. So there might, when you look at different instruments, there might be quantitative instruments, there might be interviews, focus groups, there might be different ways that you might do that from your investigation. But you can adapt these in different ways. So for example, if you find an instrument, you might decide to use it in a quantitative or a qualitative way. So this largely depends on kind of what you're measuring. So there's two kind of different impacts you can evaluate. You can look at the perceived impact. So this is largely based on the experience of the individual and the effective and interpersonal dimensions of learning. So how did the change or the use of technology or the new pedagogical approach makes them feel? How did it affect their attitude towards learning? So if we're looking at the perceived impact, we're probably looking at qualitative methods of evidencing, because it's very subjective. It's about how the technology or the teaching and learning approach made the student feel, or how did they enjoy the learning, or how they felt about the learning environment. If we're looking at the actual impact, this is more objective and based on facts. So it's not a subjective thing. Either their grades increased or didn't, either they developed the skills level or they didn't. So these are tangible, specific impact measures that you're going to use. And if you're using these approaches, it's important to use maybe more quantitative approaches. Now, when you're looking at quantitative approaches, sometimes you use self-measurement scales, which aren't always reliable, because it's actually looking at maybe how the students felt about the particular skills levels rather than the actual. So quantitative things would be like the pre and post, measuring their skills level before and after, test scores, learning analytics, looking at mistakes they've made, or time spent on activities and things like that. So it's important, if you're measuring the actual impact, you look at more quantitative or mixed methods approaches, such as I say, test scores, time spent on task, number of errors made, things like that. You can look at quantitative scales or instruments, but if there's self-measurement scales, it's kind of looking at perceived impact also. So just be cautious of this. So there's different types of evidence you can gather. As I mentioned, qualitative evidence is to do with the student perceived impact, how students or teachers might feel that the technology impacted learning. So things like student interviews and focus groups, speaking about their overall experience, how they felt, their attitudes, maybe reflective journals and portfolios where you ask students maybe to enter a prompt or talk about a particular thing. We also looked at maybe narrative, where students might tell a story about how they engage within the learning environment and how it made them feel. So getting them maybe to draw a picture or tell a story is all qualitative evidence. The teacher's observation themselves, so observation notes about, where the teacher keeps a reflection of what happened and why it happened and how they felt it went, is really, really important. Observation, where another teacher or leader might come in and observe practice, again, is qualitative evidence. It's about their perception of the impact of the technology or digital pedagogy. Is also an appropriate way of gathering evidence. Or open-ended survey responses, where students or teachers can fill in some information. Then quantitative evidence, as I said, would be academic performance and grades. Things from learning analytics like time spent on task, errors, and things like that. Surveys, although, as I said, if they're self-rating, it's important that, that there could be an element of perceived impact on that. Looking at attendance record, or maybe number of breaks taken, and things like that, are quantitative evidence that can be gathered. A lot of these, such as learning analytics or academic performance and grades, are widely available to you and can facilitate that. Also, qualitative evidence, things like observation, or maybe looking at students' work and how it changed over time, or improved or disimproved, are all kind of situated, authentic methods. So it's important to look at, if you're actually going out to gather data from students, rather than using data the students generate through the learning, is really important. So observation data is a great way of doing that, where you can observe things, in the moment itself, rather than asking students to complete something, can sometimes be easier to do. So when you're looking at gathering impact or gathering evidence to measure impact, it's important that you look at what success is. You have an area of focus that you've identified, but what does success look like in terms of that focus? So as I say, if you're looking at academic performance, what's success? Is it an increase in grades? Is it a reduction in error rate? Is it an increase in completion time? Is it achieving learning outcomes? So through this, you need to set clear, measurable criteria You need to clearly define what you're measuring. Then it's important to look at how others measure, how others have evaluated. Speak to other people, look at the literature, look at theory, ask AI to find sources of information for you. When AI gives you that information, make sure you evaluate it and make sure it's from reputable sources. And then you can choose the evidence. So just because there's particular ways of doing things out there, like instruments such as surveys, there's no reason why you can't adapt these to different contexts or the information you're gathering. So if you're looking at maybe the perceived impact, it's important to use more qualitative approaches that allow you to get an understanding of the students and teachers' experience. But if you want to measure actual impact, it's important that you use specific quantifiable data and more quantitative methods. And then you're on to gathering the data and assessing the outcomes. So looking at whether you want to gather qualitative or quantitative data and the instruments you're going to use that to measure the impact. And obviously you have to analyse this, and you're going to put all this into practice in a little while when you're looking at your own practice.